Yeah, I think the thing with self-awareness is when you're trying to find these answers, it's actually hard to find answers because a lot of people aren't self-aware, so busy telling you one thing that's not true, but they're not lying to you, they're actually lying to themselves. So when you're trying to find these answers, it's actually hard to find out success because everyone's so busy telling you a fake success that you can't find the answers. Like a lot of things that I've done recently, I've gone, someone has worked out how to do this. I was trying to get onto boards. Um, I didn't know how to get onto a board and I was struggling with it, but I reached out to someone that was actually on a board, and because I was prepared to, I convinced them that I was really genuinely interested in doing it. They sort of gave me an idea, and then from there I sort of worked that out. But I find a lot of times I've kind of have to be innovative in finding these things because no one's talking about how to actually find an answer. If money isn't everything, no one's talking about money isn't everything. So no one tells you an answer on how to actually do something different. So I think that's the challenge, and I think why people don't tell people the answers is they've kind of gone, hey, this person is not ready to hear the answer. So you can't give unsolicited advice because then it's kind of very selfish sort of thing. And if you give solicited advice, people aren't ready to hear it. So, people only listen to advice just to confirm what they're already thinking. So I think that's why a lot of this stuff, it's hard to find the answers ultimately because people are just living a fantasy world and actually don't want to find, it's hard to find people that actually sort of have explored this. If money isn't everything, you kind of need to achieve a certain level of financial success before you actually go, okay, this didn't make me as happy as I thought it was. So a lot of people will never get to that stage. And then the ones that do, realize that quickly and they sort of try and do something different, but they sort of go, I'm not going to bother telling other people this because they're not going to listen. If I just sort of tell that, they'll sort of go, "Oh, this guy's a hippie or something like that." And they're not ready to hear that answer. So it's a real challenge. And I think that's why a lot of things, I'm 44 now, I sort of look back and go, I wish I sort of came across this earlier and did things differently. But it was hard because those answers weren't there, and at least I found them. So
Yeah, look, like myself, you've found them now, which is the important thing. Like yourself, I had a whole different way of life at one stage and had no real self-awareness at all. Um, and, the human condition is a very, very funny thing. Okay, so realistically, I think most people make the best decisions they can with the information they have. Question is where they get the information from. And a lot of the time it's passed down from parent to child, parent to child, parent to child, parent to child, parent to child. I always have this basic example. We can go back 1,000 years into a local bazaar or marketplace, if you want to call it that. As a father and son, for instance, walking through the market and they overhear a conversation and they think it's true. And then he passes that on to his son, who then passes it on to them. And for generations to come, that becomes a fundamental truth. But what they didn't realize is the two people were joking,
yeah,
right? Information can be so misconstrued and then passed on so often that it becomes a fundamental truth throughout that family and even society, even though it's completely fundamentally flawed. Um, and the real trick to self-awareness is that most people aren't really overly aware. So again, it fundamentally destroys their opportunity to work out how many different roadmaps there are to live life by. And the reality of that is, in my experience, when you're young and you have sore legs and that's called growing pains, right?
Mhm.
Well, I have a theory that basically without pain, there can be no growth. And a lot of people get trapped in this perpetual cycle of, middle of the road sort of thing. And they're never really put to the test or they don't ever get to what they think will make them happy. Therefore, they don't know that it's not going to make them happy. But the more sometimes the more people suffer, the more self-awareness they have to develop. So whether it's a really bad childhood, really bad traumas, something that sets off a trigger that makes you question everything you believe and everything you know. There has to be an event. I would like to think people can go within themselves and decide that there doesn't have to be an event, but they need to question everything they know. In my experience, more often than not, it's the people that have severe traumatic circumstances or events that really do switch on and go, what really does matter in my life? And you're talking about the poorer people in Brazil and that, where they're very family orientated and that. It's just so simple for them because that is a good way of life, I think. And they're in circumstances that mean that they do that. They did a happiness study all throughout the world, all through all societies of the world and that sort of thing. And the happiest people were the poorest people in Africa and the poorest people in India. And the reason was they had absolutely nothing, but they had no expectations of having any more. But they got to spend so much time with their family and loved ones. And it was almost like a fun little adventure being poor because they weren't stressed out all the time. They just accepted where they were. And I'm not saying you can't change that, right? But there has to be some level of acceptance and willingness to just be happy as opposed to constantly chasing a carrot. So with money, materialistic things, and I know I've been there, you set a goal and you go, I just want a basic house and a basic car, and I'll be happy, right? Then you get there, but you're still not happy.
Yep.
So rather than question why you're not happy, you go, oh, I must need a bigger house and a better car. So you chase the carrot again and you can never catch it until you finally get to a point where you go, it doesn't matter what I have. There's something intrinsically wrong within me. That's why I'm not happy. And there's nothing wrong with something intrinsically wrong being within you. It's about identifying it and healing that wound or that trauma or dealing with that in order to actually find your own happiness. Because it's a cliche that happiness comes from within, but 100% happiness can only come from yourself. And it doesn't come from any materialistic object. People can go and buy a nice fancy new car and they'll feel great for about 5, 10, 15 minutes, maybe even a week. But if they haven't resolved the real issue as to why they're not happy, that car means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and I think, it's happiness comes in moments, right? You could be super happy and then something else happens, like you answer a phone call and something terrible has happened, like you're not going to be happy. And I think that I've said this before, expectation is kind of the key. Like you're not always going to be happy. You sort of get life throws different sort of cycles, but you can just improve your happiness. And I think another way is sort of I look at what you're just sort of talking about is you keep getting taught lessons until you learn. And
Yes.
um, you know, some people will get those lessons over and over again their entire life, and they'll blame other people. They'll say, I was unfortunate, I was unlucky. But the answers are there if you actually looked at them. So whether you're religious or not, you sort of sometimes go, why do I keep sort of getting this thing? But I think there is sort of a higher power sometimes trying to teach you those lessons. And you're so busy for sort of focused on if I just get to the next level, I'll be happier. And you actually not seeing what information is getting taught to you. So there's a lot of information out there, but the answers are usually there. You just got to be open mind to actually see it. And sometimes you just got to keep going through some difficult times until you go, someone's telling me something and I need to change.
It's funny because I'm going to put my hand up for the audience now and say I'm a slow learner or was
Yeah.
a slow learner. So, just briefly, obviously, I had a significantly brutal and sadistic childhood and that sort of thing. It was horrible. I was completely isolated and alone and abused every day in all different ways and that sort of thing by my parents and stuff like that. It was quite horrendous. And we won't get too much into that sort of thing because it's trigger warnings and all sorts of horrific stuff. And then I left home, lived on the streets when I was 16, finished my HSC basically on the streets until another friend took me in. And then finally escaped that. And I thought, I'm sweet, everything's good. Then I was 21. I was passenger in a car, sitting stationary. Back got broken in 5 spots. Really hit by another car doing about 80 k's an hour. And that broke my back in 5 spots and did all sorts of other injuries and that. I was screwed for years, right? And I remember I was so angry about it. I can't believe this happened to me. Life sucks, all this sort of stuff, right? as you know, which is a pretty normal response because I couldn't walk properly or anything. I had to crawl to the bathroom at times. I wasn't sure I'd ever walk again or play sports again or do anything else again. It was a pretty significant injury. When I look back at it now with clarity, you know, when we got hit, we were waiting to turn because there was oncoming traffic. When the car hit us, he hit us in such a way that the car speed over the road like that.
Mm.
And if he had hit us 1 second earlier, the car coming the other way would have ended up on my lap and I wouldn't be here at all. But for all those years, I was so angry about the pain and the injury. Not for 1 second did I stop and think, Jesus Christ, I'm really lucky to be alive.
Yeah.
You know, and so with self-awareness, I think becomes perspective. You know, people, you got to look at what your perspective is. We see the world through our own lens. Everything we've experienced, everything we've ever been taught, all the input we've had, our brain is a learning mechanism to keep us alive and to keep us safe. And so the inputs get translated into data and we respond to certain things a certain way because that's what keeps us safe. That's the duty of the brain. That's what it does. Problem with the brain is it doesn't always wake up and go, oh, we're not in that situation anymore. We don't need to respond like that. We don't need to act like that. That was an incident or a series of incidents that occurred that were unfortunate at the time, but you can learn from that and move forward. So, as I said, I had the abuse, the broken back, the relationship breakdowns, all that sort of stuff. I even had a mental health injury, mental breakdown, all that sort of stuff. And I've had the most amazing life. I love my life. I wouldn't change it for anything in the world because it's absolutely beautiful. Because eventually, after being that slow learner, you know, I actually woke up and went, there's got to be something I'm supposed to be learning out of all of this, as you were saying. And I sat down, I went through everything and went, hey, and I learned what I needed to learn. And my life was, it's all about perspective and being open-minded and understanding things from another perspective other than what you see or what you've learned. And the minute I took on a different perspective, my entire view of the world and myself and everyone else in it changed like that. And I've never been happier. So,
Yeah.
yeah, very
It's
true.
an, it's an interesting thing, the comment of I look I've actually done in my MBA things on how to be self-aware and emotional intelligence and things like that. I've done through work jobs, psychological testing, which helps you get information about your self-awareness. And I think sort of the feedback is you can do all that kind of stuff, but you sort of really go, it's just feedback from situations and feedback from others. And sometimes you sort of look back and go, I've probably heard that before, but I wasn't ready to hear it. And yeah, sometimes you'll sort of keep doing things that you're already aware of because that's just you as well. And you sort of go, I'm still not self-aware, but I think the fact that you're starting to have that conversation and sort of be aware of it enough shows you do have a level of self-awareness as well. But yeah, look, it's an ongoing thing. You can't really change who you are, so you're always going to have certain situations. But I think what it does too is it actually gives you an education. Go, if I have this situation again, I'm probably going to react this way. And coming back to the whole sort of what's important, who you hang around. If people are going to put you into that situation and that's going to be a trigger for it, you can sort of start to make decisions going, well, either I don't need to be around that person or they're sort of important enough, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that person. I also need to be around people that are going to give me a better energy. If someone's always going to put you in a negative state, you don't necessarily need to be those people. I mean, some of those people could be sort of doing that because they're just narcissistic and they're just always going to make anyone feel like that kind of thing. But what you can do is control sort of how you react to those things. So you get a level of education. And I really like the Mike Tyson quote. He sort of said, you can't be humble until you're humbled. And I think that's sort of the same with these types of things. You can't really know how to respond until you've actually gone through the situation and get pieces of evidence. So he also said like when he was poor again, he he may have been poor again, but this time he had experience. And I think that's sort of the things in life is every time these things happen, you've got experience this time. You've got a better understanding of sort of what happened, why it happened, and what you can do differently. That's not necessarily to say you're going to find the right answer this time because no one's talking about sort of when they make mistakes and things like that. As I talked about before, people are so unself-aware that they're not even having these conversations, and you kind of just need to go, okay, well, look, I need to do something differently this time to sort of stop that. But you could still do a mistake, or and it might be the right information because it worked for someone else, but it won't work for you. So I think
Yep.
that all that kind of stuff is it's just these learnings, and yeah, you keep getting evidence of, and you'll eventually sort of find what does work for you. And I think that's sort of where your fast track of success goes is when you sort of stop copying everyone else and sort of start going, what's working for me? I had that on when I worked at Macquarie. I asked the most successful advisor, what's his sales pitch? And he goes, this is my sales pitch. And he told 100 people in the room about it, and everyone sort of tried to copy it. And he sort of took me aside and said, you know what, though? Um, I'll tell you this. He goes, it works for me. That's why it's the best sales pitch, but it's probably not going to work for you. What you need to do is find one that's going to work for you. And what I've sort of learned from that, that's sort of something that happened a long time ago, is what actually works is actually being authentic. So if you all you're doing in life is copying what someone else is saying and going, okay, this is what the most successful person's currently doing, you're losing the most important piece, and that's being authentic and losing your level of trust. So if everything about in sales is actually about three things. It's about building the relationship. So people speak to people they like, they buy from people they trust. So if you're not likable and you're not developing trust, people don't even care about your products or whatever it is, no matter how good it is or how smart you are. But yeah, that's the missing piece that I sort of would never realize until that person sort of told me. But he probably didn't tell me because, well, he didn't tell others because they weren't ready to hear that information. But he recognized I was ready to hear it. So yeah, from there I sort of always just sort of go, okay, I don't care what people say the script is working, it's probably not going to work for me. And then I started getting more success.
Yeah, it's funny to say that because authenticity and being your authentic self is, well, one, it's definitely a path to being happy because you're just being you. It
Mhm.
means you also accept who you are. Doesn't mean that you think you're perfect or anything like that, but you accept your flaws and you know that you do things to address them and improve them every day. And, I wake up every day and try to be the best version of me that I can be. Certainly flawed, but each day I try and claw back some of those little flaws. But being authentic and being genuine is a key component to all of life and all of happiness, I think. Self-deception you touched on before, and we'll talk about it another time because it's a much, much bigger conversation we have time for today. Um, but with what you're saying with that sales pitch, I actually do the same thing when it comes to dating and stuff like that, right? So my girlfriend and I, for instance, when we started talking, I said to her, I'm not going to be like any other guy. I don't play by the rules or the societal norms. Society by and large make up rules that might apply to a vast majority of people, but they don't apply to me.
Yep.
What I'm going to do is be my authentic self. I said a lot of people when they date, there's a facade that goes up, and for the first 3, 6, 12 months, you don't even really get to know who the person is because it's fake, because they're trying to look the way they think you want them to be and all that sort of stuff. And I said, I'm just going to be authentically me, and that's it. And I have been, and it's been crazy. It's great because that's just who I am. And I think there's a lot of people in the business world, in the sales world, in life in general, who constantly live their lives basically behind a mask. What does society expect me to be? What does my family expect me to be? And all that sort of stuff. And it creates a lot of inner turmoil and conflict and suffering. And you can't be happy doing that. So An example of that was in respite care some years ago. They did a study on the two biggest regrets of the dying. And the second biggest regret was that they didn't spend enough time with loved ones and they worked too much. Okay, we pretty much covered how silly it is to work for 40 years and get a gold watch and not be able to watch your kids raise your kids and stuff like that today. The number one biggest regret of the dying was not living a life true to themselves and being able to be themselves.
Yeah.
They always did things for others, whether it was society, family, friends. And I don't mean do things as in help people. I mean, they felt like they were confined to act a certain way, to be a certain way, to live a certain life, and therefore they could never actually find happiness. So authenticity to me is not everyone's going to like me, not everyone's going to love me. I'm going to have haters just like everyone else does, and that's cool. That's life, Not everyone agrees on everything all the time. But for me, whether it's in business, whether it's in my personal life, authenticity is what it is, and either you love it or you hate it. But I'm not changing. I'm going to be happy being me, and whatever comes of that comes of that.
Yeah. Just sort of lastly on that authenticity thing, it seems to unfortunately be a buzzword in corporate world at the moment. Everyone's sort of saying, I want people authentic, and people get on LinkedIn and say how authentic they are, which is kind of ironic because no one talks about their flaws on LinkedIn. They just talk about how successful are, and that's not being authentic. But the other thing about it is your brand is, I don't care what anyone says, your brand is what others say about you. So you can say whatever you want, but unless someone actually believes that, and they believe it, not by that post or not by what you said in that meeting, and that they believe it on what evidence that you do every single day. So you can say you're a great father, you can say you do this, but do you actually spend time with them? Do others say that you're a great father? Do other people say that you're a great worker? Do other people say these things? I think that's sort of been a big shift. I like authenticity because, in fact, it's a word I've used in the past because I do appreciate people sort of being honest, whether that's sometimes hearing difficult sort of things as well. You appreciate that honesty, and it's few and far between. But yeah, I've sort of stopped using words like that, because I would prefer to use self-awareness, and self-awareness is actually going, I'm not good at this. Being sort of clear about that and being comfortable enough to say it. But yeah, people sort of get up there and say all these buzzwords and all that. I actually do not want to associate with people like that because I know they just don't have self-awareness.
No, from the corporate world, you'll know. There used to be people that came to me. I'm sure they came to you for advice on how to interview and all that sort of stuff, especially at the highest levels. And one of the key components was these are the current buzzwords. Work out how to put them into your answers succinctly, make it really good. And that's what they listen for in interviews. So even there, they say they want authentic people in the corporate. We both know it's a load of crap. They just want people to, look like they fit a certain mold, but really don't. And look, there are a lot of buzzwords around and stuff like that. And we talk about self-awareness and self-deception and authenticity and all that sort of stuff. But again, I'm not as defined by society like that. So I'll still use those words, not because they're a buzz, but just because they're genuine words. And I kind of say, to hell with them, they don't own the words. The words are what they are. And to your point as well, one of the things I say a lot, and again, we can go back to dating, right? A guy or a girl can make up any story they want to achieve an outcome, right? Whether it's a date or more, right? It's a bit like putting the mask on. You can pretend to be whoever you want and, whatever. And actually in dating, a lot of the time studies have shown that the people that are the most charismatic are the biggest liars of all because they just don't give a shit, right? So they can just go light their ass off and be charming because they've got nothing to lose. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting thing as far as that goes. But I missed the point I was going to make there. With dating and that, it's a bit like with business. You've got Esperanza, I've got myletters2.com. I talk all the time. Anyone can talk the talk. Anyone. But do they back it up and walk the walk? What have they been working on for the last 5 or 10 years? Who are they really? And you can see it by the actions they take. Words are insignificant next to actions. You can say whatever you want. But if your actions are entirely contradictory to what you say, then either you're lying to everyone, you're lying to yourself, or both. But if
Yeah,
you talk the talk and back it up, walking the walk, that's it. That's genuine.
yeah, and look, sometimes they can be genuine, but it's yeah, I wouldn't don't go and apply this to people for people getting a relationship. But I think you don't really know someone until something bad sort of happens and there's sort of a level of fight. So I sort of always joke and go, quick you start a fight in a dating relationship, the better you sort of kind of progress and see how you really react. That's sort of also the same with yeah, you could be a really hard worker, you perform really well, but in a difficult situation, yeah, how did you respond to that? And that's kind of what people remember, and that's kind of how you're going to be judged, sort of thing. So, and yeah, did you learn from it? Are you still that person? Everyone has probably had a difficult situation, a stressful situation, and then they've sort of how do they do that? I mean, not for me, as I said, a lot of the pre-work is I try and avoid being around those people that I know are just out there to sort of create that situation. So yeah, I create less situations. I won't react when those situations happen straight away. I know that if I go away, take the emotion out of it, I'm going to have a clearer head and a better way to respond to that situation. Sometimes you just react the wrong way because you're emotional. Sometimes it was the right gut reaction, but the way you say it and when you say it and how you say it is going to sort of be the key. But yeah, I think the other thing sometimes what I've done is I try and avoid sort of even saying those things because I'm worried about the reaction. But you realize you can't keep sort of avoiding things that sometimes you actually got to say that bothers me. But you can say it the right way, and if that people don't respect that, maybe that's just they're the wrong person kind of thing. But yeah, that's sort of something I've kind of probably learned in life and is sometimes I avoided that conflict in the past. Now I think conflict's good. I think a lot of people just in general have issues having difficult conversations in life. So people avoid things, but then it's way worse because what happens is they talk behind people's back, they lie, they say it's all good when it's not, and then you sort of see it all, and that's where the relationships are way worse than actually having a conversation. So I think society would be better if people had conversations and were taught how to deal with difficult conversations. We're never taught to have difficult conversations, especially in Australia. We're kind of taught to just avoid things, and I think that's why there's a lot of family issues, there's a lot of sort of corporate issues, there's a lot of sort of other issues, because what happens is it builds up a resentment, is those things were never resolved, so they just keep happening again and again because people just don't really know how to have the conversation.
No, and to that point, it's a bit like a fire, right? It's much easier to put out a small flame than it is to put out an inferno,
Yeah.
whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in a relationship and that sort of thing. The sooner you can have the conversation, the easier it is to put out. Whereas if you let it go and it builds and it builds and it builds, it becomes far more difficult to actually to deal with that because eventually, in a relationship, the feelings are starting to get hurt way too much, or in the business world, things are starting to crumble way too fast and things. And yeah, putting out a small fire is a hell of a lot easier than putting out a whole bushfire, obviously. And it's important that people start addressing that. And I know a lot of people, as do you, with avoidance behaviors and stuff like that. They really don't like it. Which again it's a shame. The school system really doesn't teach pretty much anything that people are going to use in the real world. Not just about any of the skills you get from school are important, right? And that system could help a lot by changing a few different things. But definitely, yeah, I'm with you too. Like, even in relationships and that early on, you have a couple of fundamental disagreements. That it's great to sit down and talk it out because then you actually work out what the healthy boundaries are for the parties involved and that sort of thing instead of ignoring it and stuff like that and letting it get out of hand. But again, it's avoidance behaviors. It's a bit like, if there's a monster coming into the room, Not that monsters are real, mind you, but in the old story of, oh, quick, throw the covers over your head. He still knows you're there. Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to magically go away. You're better off putting the covers down and trying to sort out a response or deal with it as opposed to trying to hide from it, because hiding from it gets you nowhere.
Yeah. And this is sort of something that I've, despite the frustration, as I said, of sort of realizing some of these things later in life, it's something that you have an opportunity to teach your kids. Self-awareness is something where people struggle with, and having difficult conversations and all this kind of stuff. I think they're things you can teach kids. I've sort of gone, oh, I've tried this sport, I've done this instrument, I've done all these things, and I learn all these skills. I know how to skateboard, surf, do all the, tennis, golf. I've done millions of different sports and all this, and I go, oh, this is frustrating. I sort of, haven't got a lead at any of this kind of stuff, but I go, why did I sort of spend money on these lessons and all this kind of stuff? And what was the point of that? But now, like my kids, like young, I can just go, I can teach them this fundamental, I can teach them this, and he's getting all that stuff for free. And I've, a lot of this self-awareness and all these sort of other things, they come from spending, thousands of dollars on degrees and experience and all this stuff, and he's just getting it for free. And
Yeah.
the skill will be actually sort of sharing it and not telling him he has to do it this way. I think that's the skill, is actually not coming across as someone that says this is the way to do it. I've I've had family that in the past that sort of said you've got to do it this way, and A, they're wrong, but B, no one is going to respond when you tell them you have to do it this way. But you can share the knowledge and say, look, I'll leave you with this to make the best decision for yourself. And I think that's sort of a lot of people respond quite well to that. And
Well, you're touching on an important topic, and we'll have to wrap up for today shortly, everyone,
yeah,
unfortunately. Simple question, not so simple an answer. I mean, it is at its core, but fundamentally not necessarily simple. You've got a young child. I have young children. Do you want to raise your child to know how to make money? If you had a choice between the two, how to make money, or do you want to teach your child how to grow up and be resilient and be able to adapt and to be mentally and physically healthy for the rest of their lives?
I'm going to cheat here a little bit and say that if you aren't self-aware and happy and following a purpose, you won't actually be as successful financially. So
Yeah,
it's actually I think that's where people go so wrong, is they chase the money, they chase sort of the financial focus, and you kind of there's a lot of skills. I used to love drawing and doing cartoons and things like that when I was a kid. They were just naturally sort of creative things that I did. And I was told go into finance, be an accountant, do these things. I didn't do the accountant, but I did financial planning. But there were conversations when I was like 5 years old, and kind of ironic that I sort of ended up in those fields. But some of the skills I've got now, like with this podcast and the graphic designs and things like that, I can actually sort of go take this and do it quite well. That was skills I had naturally, and maybe if I sort of followed those back in the day, I would have it been even more successful. But hindsight's a funny thing, but I think sort of I would tell my kids sort of focus on what makes you happy, focus where your passions are, follow those things, and you'll naturally find a career that will sort of bring you money. But because you're good at it, and that's what you love doing, you'll just by default be financially successful.
yeah. No, that's a good answer. Look, I basically sum it up with everyone and say I just want to raise happy, well-adjusted humans, because at the end of the day, whether they have money or not, they're going to be able to find a way to be happy. They're going to be able to enjoy their life better. You see so many parents now that, I know kids in primary school where they're doing 4 hours of schoolwork every night after school in primary school. You're going to burn those kids out by the time they get to uni. They'll be lucky if they make it through. There's so much pressure, and it comes back to the housing prices and cost of living crisis and all this sort of stuff. But the reality is, there's a lot of people focusing on trying to teach their kids how to make money, but it's just not where happiness comes from. I just want to raise well-adjusted, happy children that, are good for society, good for themselves, and do things to help other people. And the rest will come, the rest will go. But, being able to adjust, being well-adjusted as far as being good people, and being able to be happy no matter what your circumstances bring. Because let's face it, there's people out there that they inherit a lot of money, think they're happy, go broke, and then really, really lose the plot. Yeah, I'm trying to raise children that no matter whether they have no money, whether they have lots of money or anything between, it's irrelevant. They're going to be happy anyway. So that's my goal with my kids for sure.
Yeah, and you're starting to see that now, even in the jobs that are paying the most, they're all saying we want emotionally intelligent people. And
Yeah,
you can put whatever on your resumes that you want to get that job, but emotional intelligence, that those kind of skills are bloody hard. They take a lot of work, and if you can develop that from day one, and it's a lot harder to change something after been doing it for 40 years than it is to just sort of learn the right ways from the start. So yeah, I think you're 100% right. And we're even starting to see that in society, because it's proven. It doesn't matter how smart you are. You could get A's in maths and English and all this kind of stuff, but if you can't speak to people and you can't do public speak, that's why I encourage my child to either public speak or sing or do something that they're comfortable in those skills, because they are so important. And they're what every single one who's successful in life has.
yeah, good answer. All right. Thanks for joining us on the Reflections podcast. You've been with me, Nathan, and with Steve.
Thanks,
It's been
Nathan.
a great episode. We've got a lot more to come. Hope you had fun. I know I sure did.
Yep,
Steve, you
definitely.
had fun?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's good.
awesome.
Yeah, it's a good
All right.
conversations.
Yeah, we're gonna let you go and we'll see you next time. Take it easy.
So.